The Awakening of Joel Singer, Part 7, Pizza and Plato. Since they were about to have a conversation about the nature of the universe itself, and he was now familiar with Joel's appetite, Dr. Harrington decided to move the rest of the conversation to Selina's, his favorite pizzeria just a block away. Luckily, it was an off time and they had tables available in the back. "I'll just start with one," Joel said to Dom, the cheerful Italian owner. "Coming right up," Dom replied, grabbing a slice. Joel looked downright despondent. Dr. Harrington laughed and handed the owner a $100 bill. "Give us the whole pie, Dom. And keep 'em coming," he said as they brought the pie to a large table. "So," Dr. Harrington said, "what do you mean the nature of your abilities and the nature of the universe might be one and the same?" Dr. Harrington asked. "I mean that at the most fundamental level, all the things I can manifest have been there the whole time, lying dormant, waiting for the right signal from me so they could be realized." "Okay, but this is how everything in the universe manifests. Every possible thing in the universe, in every possible scenario, is already real, already here, waiting to be told to come to fruition," Joel said. "How so?" "Let me take a step back," Joel replied, only now settling down in his chair. "So a given chemical gets its properties from the way its atoms are arranged. For elements, the number of electrons traveling around each proton, and for compounds, the way these atoms are bonded together to make up each molecule." "Right?" "Well, that in itself was perhaps the most amazing discovery of all time. It's just that now, we're so familiar with it, we don't see it that way. But think of it, just the way these particles are arranged determines all the properties of a chemical. Even though it's been determined that all fundamental particles, all protons, neutrons, and electrons are exactly alike. It's the arrangement of these particles that tells the chemical what properties to have. The same fundamental particles that make up botulism, a billionth of a gram of which can kill a full-grown man, are those that make up water. So the arrangement of particles signals the properties chemicals will take, similar to how you signal all kinds of things to manifest with all manner of different properties," Dr. Harrington replied. "Is that your point?" "Yes." "Okay, but what do you mean all these possible manifestations are already here? Here as opposed to where?" "Here as in everywhere, as opposed to just one particular place, a place perhaps forever out of reach." "Based on what?" "Based on experiments that have looked at what makes up matter and energy at the most fundamental level, at the level of quantum physics." "Like?" Dr. Harrington asked. "Let me start with the most famous one, the light slit experiment." They were both familiar with the experiment, which often served as an introduction to quantum physics. Researchers had taken a rectangular device with two small slits cut in it. They then took a special light, slowed it down to where it was emitting as little as one photon, one light particle at a time, and put it in the middle of the two slits, expecting to see the photon go through one slit or the other and create a band of light there. Instead, there was an interference pattern all across the back of the device, even where the light wasn't hitting. This meant the photon was interfering with itself. In other words, the one particle was also acting as a wave and going through both slits at the same time. "But that was just the beginning," Joel explained, that further experimentation found that one photon would go through not just two slits at the same time, but multiple slits. Then it was discovered that the individual photons did not just travel the most direct path through these slits, but at the quantum level they went everywhere, took every possible path, not just in the room, but every possible trajectory in the solar system and even the universe. "How did they see all these other versions of the photon, these ghost particles, as I believe they're called?" Dr. Harrington asked. "They couldn't. They were only able to see their effects, like the interference pattern. In fact, any wave they hit the stream of photons with, which they had to do for direct observation, would cause the photon to simply travel through one slit or the other." "So sending a wave eliminates all these other pathways? These probability waves? It causes decoherence, I think the term is," That's quite a limitation, especially as it relates to your abilities. They work by sending wave signals, so you really can't take advantage of this ubiquitous quantum world, can you? It does put a limitation on what I can do, but there's a lot more to the equation than that one series of experiments. Like what? One famous experiment that won the Nobel Prize in 2022 established the validity of quantum entanglement, where linked particles instantaneously affect one another regardless of distance, and in turn, established that the universe does not exist locally at the most fundamental level. Quantum entanglement is already being deployed in the nascent quantum computer industry. Other experiments have proven that not only can photons and other fundamental particles be detected in two places at once, but even objects like buckyballs, bulky molecules made up of as many as 70 carbon atoms. So, this phenomenon is seen whether you're talking about matter or energy, Dr. Harrington said. Interesting. Yes, which shouldn't be surprising when you think about it, Joel replied. Matter on any scale is already made up of waves of energy. Matter is a kind of energy that responds to a certain signal that gives it mass. Yes, but matter is fundamentally different when it comes to your abilities, Dr. Harrington replied. Matter has to be molded and shaped, not just signaled. The differences aren't so clear-cut, Joel replied. Think of an extreme example, a boulder hitting a man in the head. It's not the boulder's mass that's going to kill him. It's the waves of kinetic energy that are released when the boulder hits the man. In fact, it has been shown that because of the way electrons will always repel one another, we never actually quite touch anything. And there are more mundane examples of pure energy signaling us, affecting us in a way that seems like matter. For example, one doesn't need liquor to make oneself drunk. A hypnotic suggestion can do the same. Oh? And then there's the effect of music for therapeutic uses. Music has been shown to reduce pain and heart rates after cardiac surgery, reduce blood pressure and anxiety, much like a drug would. Okay, Dr. Harrington replied. So everything is made up of waves. Waves that can also act like particles. So how did you get a signal through that mountain? It was too thick to just send a wave through. That's where the holographic universe model is helpful, Joel replied. The what? Holographic universe theory. It's an offshoot, or sister theory, if you will, of superstring theory, which says that at the most fundamental level, all matter and energy is made up of little vibrating loops, or strings. The strings are like the waves on the holographic plate in this case. What is that all about? Well, everyone is familiar with the 3D images manifested by a hologram. Sure. Now, not all light projections are holograms, but those that are share some remarkable features. They're both familiar with these features. For example, how a hologram first starts with a holographic plate. On the plate is not a flat version of the projection, but what looks like a jumble of waves that are intersected with each other at various angles, and in some cases, canceling each other out. Not unlike if one threw a bunch of rocks in a pond all at once and created these intersecting wave patterns. What is on the plate bears no resemblance to the projections, which are generated by hitting the plate with a laser at the right angle and using mirrors in the right position to reflect the images produced by the beam. I can see the analogy with the arrangement of subatomic particles that act like waves generating the properties of visible objects, Dr. Harrington commented. I also see where only a small fraction of the universe's possibilities are realized at any given time. Having been given the right set of signals, like a small section of a holographic plate receiving a light signal to form a projection while far more remains hidden. But that's just the beginning, Joel said. Not only does a holographic plate have the amazing ability to project images seemingly unrelated to the waves on the plate, it contains a vast amount of memory, 3.9 terabytes on a 12-centimeter disk, enough to store 950 movies. What's more, each image it can project is not localized or located in any particular place on the plate. Break a holographic plate in half, and both plates will produce the same images. Break the plates in half again, and the situation is the same. In other words, all the information contained on the plate is wholly contained in each piece, no matter how small. Reminds me of the human body. How all the genetic information for the whole is contained in each cell. Dr. Harrington replied. Yes, exactly. But when you talk about holographic plates and the waves on them, Dr. Harrington said, you're just talking about information. And these omnipresent quantum waves seem like they're just information too. Maybe so, but information is the key to the universe. The Greek philosophers used to call numbers immortal gods, or information, if you will, since all information can be broken down into numbers. And holographic universe theory is all about information. How so? Take black holes, for example. More specifically, a discovery regarding the entropy of black holes. Entropy, the measure of how disordered things are? Yes, or also a measurement of how many and what kind of changes you can make to an object without changing its properties. Water, for example, is in a high entropy state. You can shake up water in a covered container as violently as you like, but not much is going to change about it. It's still going to take the shape of its container, have the same density, etc. Now imagine doing the same thing to a person. You'd kill him if you shook hard enough, with countless other structural and chemical changes along the way, Dr. Harrington responded. Another example is the infamous but true notion that if there was a nuclear war, the cockroaches would survive us. It's true that cockroaches have a much higher threshold for surviving radiation, 80 times higher, in fact. Certain bacteria can survive 3,000 times as much radiation as people. That's because what radiation does, put simply, is increase the error rate in our body's functioning, like in the process of DNA transcription into RNA for cell reproduction. It introduces chaos. That's why you see people getting incredible powers from radiation in comic books, but in real life, it usually just causes death and deformity. But a cockroach is a much simpler creature, genetically. It can withstand a higher error rate without dying because it's not as complex. Joel nodded. It's a higher entropy entity. A black hole, in turn, is the ultimate high entropy entity. Its infinite density makes it homogeneous in every way, and nothing is going to change that. Or, said another way, Dr. Harrington replied, it's as if the information for every possible entity in every possible scenario is held by that black hole, as if you're measuring information itself. Yes, decades ago, a scientist made this link, that to measure entropy allowed the measuring of information itself. If you're talking about black holes, you get to the maximum amount of information that can be stored on any space. You mean, in any space? Dr. Harrington replied. No, I mean on any space. That's what's so interesting. It has been determined that the maximum entropy, or information content, of a black hole is calculated using its surface area, not its volume. Just like a holographic plate, Dr. Harrington said. Exactly. And since it is the information content of any given thing, the way its components are arranged that determines its properties. Information is all that really matters. Everything is a projection of the information it contains, Dr. Harrington surmised. Yes. That's still a hard concept for the typical person to grasp. Do you really think so? Joel asked. If you talk about something harmful, like a burning acid, you're really talking about harmful information, the same fundamental particles arranged in a different way. So to speak of matter and energy without information is meaningless. But what about something like a huge explosion? You can't say energy is all but meaningless there, Dr. Harrington said. But you can, Joel replied. It is, after all, information that determines the size of an explosion. Take, for example, the explosion of the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. One of the most efficient uses of energy the world has ever seen. An interesting way of putting it, Dr. Harrington interjected. Well, yes, but in any case, that explosion only used 2% at most of the available energy in that bomb. That's how inefficient the information was. Joel nodded. Still, if this quantum world where all possibilities already exist is normally too small to be detected, never mind manipulated, what difference does it make aside from being an interesting model? It's actually worse than that. Another problem is that everything we use to detect the quantum world is already the manifestation of a certain arrangement of subatomic particles. It's like the characters on a movie screen searching for the camera they're projected from, Dr. Harrington offered. But it can only use other projections on the screen to do so. Yes, and yet every form of life, everything with consciousness, manipulates the quantum world whether we can see it or not. Sure, but isn't that really a matter of semantics? Dr. Harrington replied. I mean, I see what you're saying, that in mixing chemicals and putting objects together, we change things at the quantum level, in a sense. But only according to the laws of traditional physics. You're just talking about a new way of seeing things. I know you can change yourself, push your abilities closer to our limits than anyone else on Earth. But I don't see how you should be able to go past them, or how you were able to go past them in North Korea. Perhaps it shouldn't be surprising when you consider that the brains of organisms, especially human brains, are the best possible microcosm we have for a universe that operates on holographic principles. How so? Well, just to take one example, consider even a lower animal, like a rat. In an experiment back in 1946, it was discovered that a rat couldn't be made to forget to run through a maze, no matter how much of its brain was removed, although it did start to stumble when more than half of it was gone. In other words, the memory was in no specific place. That researcher and many others noticed that the same held true with their human patients. The same researcher who performed the experiment on the rats had observed for years that his human patients that needed surgical removal of parts of their brains also never had specific memories erased, while others were left. So, memories are spread throughout the brain, like in a hologram? Yes, in fact, when one observes brain activity while recalling a memory, what is seen is not a certain brain cell lighting up, much the way memory is stored in one spot at a time on a computer, but rather a certain electrical pattern called an engram, involving many neurons, many brain cells. Like the wave patterns on a holographic plate? Exactly. And by activating a pattern across many neurons for each memory instead of one neuron per memory, you end up with many more memories that can be stored, Dr. Harrington surmised. Yes. In fact, the memory capacity of the human brain has been estimated at 2.5 million gigabytes, enough to store 3 million hours of TV shows. But that's not the only way the brain acts, like not just a hologram, but also like a quantum computer. For example, take the different functions the brain performs. Most people are aware that signals are sent from one neuron to another, but it is less known that most neurons do not actually touch, even when they communicate. Instead, a different chemical, a different neurotransmitter is produced and released into the synapse, the gap between neurons, depending on what function has been learned and is now being performed. And that makes the brain much more flexible, Dr. Harrington replied. It shows that the same section of the brain, the same neuron even, can perform many different functions, and the quantum computing you mentioned, he continued. It uses a similar principle, I believe, using the different states of subatomic particles, their superpositions as they're called, which can exist simultaneously to allow a single particle to perform different functions. Joel nodded. In fact, Nobel Prize winner Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff have theorized that the brain does in fact act like a quantum computer, facilitated by microtubules inside neurons that have shown evidence of quantum effects. But if that is the case, if the brain is so flexible, so versatile, then why can't everyone do the things you can do? Dr. Harrington asked. Joel shrugged. Part of the answer may lie again in the body's tendency to actively limit us to what we need to survive. Right, like with myelinization, brain pruning, etc., as we discussed. Yes, but even beyond that. Take, for example, the case of Ken Walters, a world-renowned graphic artist whose work appears on top-selling video games. The thing with this man was he became a world-class artist after having a stroke, after part of his brain had been damaged, not added to. So something in his brain that was holding him back was taken away, holding him back from tapping into hidden possibilities. Joel nodded. And he's one of many examples of people who made a career in the arts only after brain damage of some sort. But these incidents elucidate more than how our brains sometimes limit us. They also show how the brain can still tap into these undiscovered quantum potentialities. How? Through insight. Insight? Yes, just think of it. Think of what some of the greatest geniuses of all time had to say on this subject. Thomas Edison once said, "Invention is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." But all his hard work would have been worthless without that 1%. Einstein said that imagination is more important than knowledge, but I think it's clear he was referring to insight, not random musings. He was referring to taking what exists in one's mind already and bringing it into physical reality for the rest of us. Plato, 2,000 years before quantum physics could prove the existence of probability waves, wrote that all information already existed and that knowledge was uncovered, not created anew. He said, in fact, that discovery was a form of remembering. He also wrote of the forms, the information that determined the properties of an object, that were the key to the universe. He was stating that objects were projections of information 2 millennia before holograms were invented. Okay, Dr. Harrington replied. So maybe our brain can tap into this hidden world through insight. But we've gotten off track here. What about what you did in Korea? Sending those healing signals to the peasants without sending them through the mountain in between. That's far beyond what any normal person can do. If you mean just with their own bodies, that's true. But not if you include what has been accomplished with the use of equipment. People had already sent signals from one place to another without going through the space in between before me. Really? Yes, Joel said. And there's more. There have been successful subsequent experiments where atoms, objects with mass in other words, have been teleported without going through the space in between. Wow. So this quantum manipulation has been done. If that's the case, then why isn't it done all the time? Why isn't everyone teleporting? Well, for starters, Joel responded, the same phenomenon that makes this type of communication possible also makes it extremely rare and difficult. You see, it's true in a sense that everything is connected, and that makes practically anything possible. But that's just the problem. Everything is connected. Not just the two objects you're trying to manipulate, but everything in between them. And that makes for a lot of interference, which takes objects out of their quantum state, causing decoherence again, Dr. Harrington surmised. Just like an outside wave would in the slit experiment you mentioned. Right. A virtual vacuum must be created between particles for any equipment to detect or manipulate these quantum connections. Otherwise, the interference is too great. But not for you, then. Or, if you are limited, how? I'm limited now, and I will always be somewhat. I can't just produce an infinite amount of energy. So, what's your limit? It's a limit on the amount of information I can control at any given time, which, in turn, determines how much matter and energy I can give properties. And what is that limit? I'm not sure. Let's talk about something concrete. How large an explosion could you cause? Joel pondered for a moment. I suppose if you took my own body as the bomb, if I wanted to go out with a big bang, I could learn to make my body explode with nearly perfect efficiency in a fraction of a second. And how large an explosion would that be? It would be 85,000 times as large as the Hiroshima explosion. That is how much energy has been measured to be contained by the human body. My God. Don't worry, Joel replied. I have no intention of becoming a suicide bomber. But there is one way you are unique, Dr. Harrington said. You can manipulate and produce even inanimate objects just by sending the right signals from your mind. Like changing that section of mountain to quartz in North Korea. Joel thought for a moment. Not really, he replied. Speaking of neurotransmitters as we did earlier, the body manufactures over 60 different types that we know of, almost certainly many more, and that's just one type of compound the body produces. And as we discussed before, the body already involves one object signaling others in a sense, Dr. Harrington added, not one monolithic object. Yes, Joel replied, nodding enthusiastically. Perhaps it wouldn't be as much of a stretch as it might initially seem. Are you saying there are others who have been able to change inanimate objects just by sending signals? In a sense, if we look at termite mounds, for example. Dr. Harrington put up his hand. This is right back to just moving stuff around and mixing stuff together. Fair enough, Joel replied. But consider what magnificent contraptions these mounds are. They can rise to over 25 feet high and hold over 500,000 termites. These mounds are built with complex vents and central chimneys to alternatively draw in and release air. They have multiple chambers for growing eggs, larvae, and pupae, all of which must be kept at precisely different levels of temperature and humidity. This is all done at precise intervals in a matter of weeks by animals with tiny specks for brains, and without a leader or a teacher. Joel immediately thought of many similar examples. Beavers' dams, birds' nests, bees' hives, and more, but thought his point had been made. Dr. Harrington rubbed his chin. The instruction on how to build these termite mounds are imprinted on them genetically, even though the termite mounds themselves are of course part of the outside world. And these instructions are for how to send the right signals, in a sense. If we are counting kinetic waves, for example, as a signal. Joel nodded. The line between where the termites end and the outside world they are manipulating begins isn't so obvious. Well, Joel, the same holds true for you, and I'm expecting much more from you than termites. You should develop your abilities further. I do, every day, and we're making progress with some other tough diseases. No, I mean your abilities that are useful. In a tussle. I'm very thankful that you were able to use them to save Greg. You may need them again when I send you to Bolivia. Bolivia? Yes. I'm sure you've heard about the civil war there. Of course, it's not so civil in more ways than one. The new government has taken control and has been slaughtering civilians, taking sex slaves, and all kinds of other horrors. But, Dr. Harrington put up his hand. I know, but it's an internal matter, you're thinking. Well, not really. This General Diaz has brought in outsiders to keep his power. Yes, I know, and that's why we should be out of there in a week or two, like we were in North Korea. We're going to kick out these outsiders and be back sooner than some cruises would be. Thank you, Dr. Harrington, but where I'm going next is back to Nevada. Back to the Reform Center and the lab there. You're needed more where I'm sending you. You'll have the opportunity to help millions of people, not just a few hundred. Joel hesitated. I'm not just helping the people released from the center. These men go out into their communities and set a good example. They could influence thousands and, who knows, maybe millions eventually. But probably not your sperm donor, Dr. Harrington retorted. Joel clenched his jaw but didn't respond. Look, I know we've gone over the statistics, but I'm afraid you'll find that all too many of the men you release are as immutable in their degenerate ways as your sperm donor. They're just better actors. I don't really rely on what they say. Yes, I know. You can detect their biofeedback, and that's just it. I don't deny these men believe what they say when they're saying it. But they're saying it when they're still at the prison, before they get a comeback dose of heroin, or a whiff of perfume, or see a weak old man with his wallet bulging in his pocket. There was an awkward silence. Well, maybe I could adjust the evaluation process to... That's hardly going to make it foolproof. Then I suppose that's just a chance I'm going to have to take, Joel said tersely. It's not you who's taking the chance, Dr. Harrington responded. It's society who's going to be in danger when these men fall back to their old ways. We haven't had a single relapse. Treating the reformees well has been effective. I don't care if it's effective sometimes. They don't deserve to be treated well. Deserve, Dr. Harrington? That's not a scientific word. Dr. Harrington glared. Imagine if we took all these criminals, he said, all over the country, at least the violent felons, and just shot them after the first offense. Think of how much harm we could prevent and how little we would give up. Joel sat stunned. But, Dr. Harrington... Yes, of course, Dr. Harrington said with a wave of his hand. Forgive me. I understand your feelings, but if the goal is to help millions, I should still stay in Nevada where the lab is. We still haven't come up with a cure to AIDS, and we have a long way to go to cure all types of cancer. But that's just it. That's why this mission is so important. I understand. Our medicines might not get to the people who need them because of the government, just like in North Korea. Not like there, much worse. It's a government that's actively attacking and enslaving its own people. I don't deny it's probably terrible. Neither did I. I knew about it. Browsed over the first couple of paragraphs of a few articles, but it took hearing about it from a man who was there for it to get past my thick skull. A man now here as a researcher. We have to go. I'm not sure we'll actually... Imagine how harshly history would judge us if we stood by and did nothing to stop this genocide despite having the power to do so. I see your point, but going to North Korea, actually using my ability in a military fashion, the way I paralyzed those men and put them in such pain. I understand. You don't want to use your abilities to harm, but the fact is you are the greatest destructive force the world has ever known. And that comes with certain responsibilities. Every bit as much as your healing abilities do. What is it the good book says? He who lives by the sword dies by the sword, but not automatically. Not unless someone swings that just sword. Of course, I am again speaking metaphorically. No one has to be killed there. I'm not going. Look, I'm not going, and stop interrupting me. I have a plane to catch back to Nevada. Dr. Harrington drummed his fingers on the table. In that case, I hope you brought a personal credit card to pay for that flight, and I hope it has a high credit limit, since you'll need it to fund the operations of that zoo out there. Joel swallowed hard. I would bet there are some other CEOs out there who would let me use their company credit card to fund the center. They might want to see if I could make them tens of billions of dollars a year as well. Dr. Harrington glowered at Joel, his face turning flush. He stood up and walked within a foot of a wary Joel, and then burst into raucous laughter. Very good. You made me blink, he said as he patted the young man on the back. Maybe I should send you to negotiate the price of our next drug with the MCOs. Fine, you do what you're comfortable with. We'll struggle on without you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Joel, thank you so much for coming. What you've taught me today has been invaluable. I wish you luck developing your abilities to the fullest. I couldn't imagine a better steward of them. Joel had to leave for his flight, and so thanked the doctor and took his leave. A minute after Joel passed through the door, Dr. Harrington picked up the phone. Demetrius, he said. Did the body scan work properly? Yes, sir, came the response. Good. Have the information sent to the lab in New Jersey, to the same group that's been working on the DNA sample. I want every last cell of Joel's body analyzed and dissected thoroughly. Yes, sir. Dr. Harrington, has anything so far come from the DNA samples? Not much yet, Dr. Harrington said, ending the call. He discreetly pulled out a syringe from his suit jacket, which he injected. Joel had been sent a text asking him to meet Ron at the opening game of the New York Giants football team. Paperwork for his reform center that both needed to sign had been sent to the suite there. Joel was dropped off by limousine right out front and met by stadium staff, then brought right up an elevator. His exposure to the raucous crowd was minimal before reaching the luxurious accommodations that rose above the crowd below in every way. Ron was alone in the suite, no longer in his suit but still nattily dressed in a blue dress shirt and gray slacks. The suite had a full bar and a sofa, but Ron was seated up front for the best view of the game. Ron waved Joel over to one of the fold-down seats in the same row. I was told you have some paperwork for me, Joel said. Yes, the courier will be here shortly. Come, sit down. They're about to kick off. Can we get you a drink? Some food, perhaps? No, I'm good. Are you a football fan? I haven't caught much of it, no. Ron was fixated on the kickoff. The Giants' first-round pick, Morgan, is set to receive. This guy ran a 4.240 and ran 9 kickoff returns for touchdowns in college. The crowd roared as Morgan received the ball and immediately started running past defenders like they were stuck in concrete, weaving to the 50-yard line in what seemed like an instant. Ron rose out of his seat and pumped his fist as Morgan reached the opponent's 30-yard line, where the ball was dislodged by a fortuitous helmet placement from the intrepid kicker and recovered by the Eagles. Ugh. Ron groaned as he sat back down. You wouldn't have dropped that ball, he said, turning to Joel. In fact, you're the best football player in this stadium, aren't you? I think the best football players are those who have played the best football, Joel replied. Sure, but you could go down there and block, run, or catch better than anyone on that field right now. Maybe being the best quarterback would take a couple days of training, tops. I suppose. It's a hell of a thing, being you. You could be the world's best athlete in any sport, or the greatest musician, you name it. Joel paused. That's the thing. When you can be anything, what are you? That's the question for all of us, isn't it? Of course, anything has an expanded definition, in your case. You should be the best version of yourself, though. We all should be. It's not your fault. If that takes you only a thought, well, it takes the rest of us years of strife. They commiserated about the surreal past couple of years, especially as it pertained to Joel's emerging abilities. The conversation turned to Tina and the perspective of such a civilian. So you've known Tina since before you joined No-Tech? Joel nodded. Has she seen some of the more unusual things you can do? She was there when the CVs came for me at the library and there was trouble. What does she make of all this? She was shocked at first, but I guess it's amazing how quickly you get used to what's strange when you're around it every day. I can attest to that. Is Tina your girlfriend? No, no, she's not. Really? She doesn't want to date the most brilliant scientist on Earth, who just happens to be able to kick the butt of anyone else in the world? And a nice guy, besides? I don't really emphasize all that. You're too modest. Of course, you wouldn't need to brag about yourself. You could probably just figure out a way to signal her brain directly to become attracted to you. You could make her pheromones or whatever get all in a tizzy when you come in the room. Perhaps, but it really wouldn't be that different than a fellow at a bar down the street trying to say the right words to get a lovely into bed. He uses a mixture of sound waves to try to send the right signals, right? You could just send your signals more effectively and directly. Joel smiled awkwardly. I don't think... Of course, I'm just being hypothetical. I'm just having a little fun with what you could do if you weren't busy saving the world. Yes, of course. And then again, if Tina doesn't want to play ball, so to speak, Ron intoned, motioning toward the field, there are plenty of other women out there. Speaking of being your best self, there's no need to make yourself irresistible to any woman when you can make yourself irresistible to every woman. Joel had heard this line of discussion of how his abilities could help satisfy one's libidinous desires, overheard when various frat boys, Wall Street, tomcats, and bikers alike expounded on the possibilities of which this rumored young man could avail himself. He had to admit, this discussion was more than once an internal one with himself. You know, I don't really age, right? There's plenty of time for all that. Ron took a sip of scotch. If you don't mind me saying, sometimes I think you've already grown old. You know, there's nothing I can give you except maybe permission to have some fun. Just then a courier came in with the awaited paperwork, which Ron signed and handed to Joel. He invited Joel to stay for the rest of the game, but Joel begged off, citing his early flight back to Nevada in the morning. He thanked Ron for his hospitality, took his leave, and headed for the door. You know, Joel, Ron said as Joel was leaving, maybe there is nothing I can give you. But when the time comes, I do know how to get the party started. Joel gave a polite but non-committal smile and left. A minute later, Ron picked up his cell phone and called Dr. George Burnson, the InnoGem CEO. Well, that was informative, Dr. Burnson said as he picked up. The conversation just now or the one earlier between the kid and Bob? Both. Did the rest of the council get on the call as well, including our government friend? Yes, he was on the call, along with that young fellow from the Knights. This situation certainly has made for some strange bedfellows. It has. But that gang could really help us someday, Ron replied. Between the CVs and the cops, haven't they been all but wiped out? We'll see. In any case, Burnson said, I've got a lot more people behind me, people with deep pockets and a lot of connections, and they're willing to follow my lead, if it means they don't have to get directly involved. Who are these people? Ron asked. Let's just say this pair we were just eavesdropping on and their nifty little inventions. have put a crimp in some very nice lifestyles. Ones our anonymous friends have no intention of giving up, Dr. Bernson replied. What? They don't appreciate all the lives no tech has saved and improved? Sure they do. They just wish you wouldn't save and improve them so quickly. Pills tend to be far more profitable when they have to be taken over the course of a lifetime. Now. They can hardly blame us for trying to save our patients in one shot. I'm afraid we don't consider it philanthropic. We've noticed your accountants haven't forgotten your treatments are often single dose, and they price your pills accordingly in the tens of thousands or more. No tech makes out just fine, Dr. Bernson said. And what did our government friend have to say about the conversation? Ron asked. He didn't sound too optimistic. How was that? More specifically, he said this fucking kid is becoming invincible. We're never going to get rid of him. And you said, Ron asked. I let him know gently that he was wrong. Joel can be killed, no matter how powerful he becomes. In fact, he told us how, today. Demetrius stopped in to see Dr. Harrington shortly after Dr. Harrington's return to the office. His imposing presence unsettling the pampered desk jockeys he walked past despite his professional shirt and tie attire. Dr. Harrington had let Demetrius listen in on their conversation at the pizzeria for security purposes. Why do I get the feeling you already know more than you let on? Demetrius asked. Dr. Harrington smiled. My goal was to learn, not to tell what I already knew. Demetrius nodded approvingly. Keep him talking. Get him to reveal as much as possible. I get it. Demetrius nodded lightly a couple of more times before he headed for the door. He turned around as his hand was on the doorknob. There's one thing I don't get. What's that? Dr. Harrington asked, distractedly, already going back to his laptop. In that tussle we had up in Connecticut, the one you decided wasn't necessary after all, why did Joel seem stronger than us? Dr. Harrington scoffed without looking up. Joel can change his anatomy. Did you really want me to turn you into a beetle so you could be a little stronger? He seemed stronger than us even in human form. Now Dr. Harrington looked up exasperated. What's your point? You've told us there's no point in us working out. After all, what weights could we lift? But I have done a little homework on isometric exercises, using my own strength to push myself, similar to what astronauts do in zero. I'm familiar with them. Yes, well, in any case, they didn't make me any stronger. You have the strength of 200 normal men. Are you really surprised pushing your hands together didn't make you any stronger? Demetrius remained serious. Do you mean you made us as strong as possible, and that you didn't keep us from increasing our strength as adults? That the plan wasn't to make us strong, but not so strong we couldn't be controlled? Dr. Harrington shook his head. I think you've been spending more time navel-gazing than you have been working out. That's not much of an answer. Dr. Harrington paused. You owe me your life, your livelihood, and your abilities, and you come here presuming I owe you answers? Dr. Harrington softened, raising his hand in a calming gesture. Look, the next time you want to question me like this, here's my suggestion. Think about what you want to say carefully. Write down some notes. Put on your best suit. And then, shut the fuck up! Thank you for letting me know my place, sir. He turned back to the door and walked out. The young Bolivian couple had a beautiful day for their wedding in La Paz. Under the bright sun only slightly shielded by the soaring Andes Mountains, they stood surrounded by more than 50 loved ones on a large platform in the middle of a plaza. It was a beautiful, eclectic mix of Baroque Spanish churches, topped with exquisite twin cornices, colorful avant-garde architecture and playful shapes that paid homage to the indigenous Incan and Tehuanacan cultures. And higher up in the mountains, rustic, burnt umber adobe homes linked together as they traversed ever higher. Traditional Bolivian music filled the air, the soulful woodwind sounds of sicus, bamboo pipes of staggered lengths wrapped in llama wool strings, mixing with the high-pitched twang of small-bodied charangos. The smell of dust mixed with that of spices slathered onto the cuy, guinea pig, the cook had roasted whole as was the norm. The crowd twirled, hopped, and stomped, including several festival dancers in their flamboyant costumes, while some older ladies in their ubiquitous bowler hats clapped along, their faces beaming. Carrie, hidden 50 yards away, was the first to hear a sound that was anything but festive. The fears of trouble that had brought her here were about to be realized. General Marquez, stationed 300 miles away, had caught wind of the wedding, about the couple that was tired of hiding from the militant groups they were calling Los Forasteros, the outsiders. Carrie figured if she had heard about this wedding from 300 miles away, Los Forasteros would have as well. Officially outlawed by General Diaz, Los Forasteros had been the key to his keeping his power, pulling from the ranks of disgruntled young men in neighboring Brazil, Argentina, Peru, and beyond. Diaz had promised them women and riches, primarily those they could grab for themselves in return for their aid. They had given him control over most of the country, this section of La Paz being one of the few exceptions. The first helicopter swept into view as Carrie and her 4 companions made it to the outer back wall of a small store on the edge of the plaza. When Carrie stuck her head out, she saw all 6 choppers. They opened fire. First, they took out the handful of men who ran out of the huts and stores with rifles hopelessly overmatched. The rounds tore through the men's bodies, leaving fist-sized holes, a dozen or more in a couple of seconds. Carrie rushed to load the shoulder-mounted bazooka they had snuck underneath their truck. The lead Helibres chopper was actually a retrofitted transport model modified for these attacks. It was a poor choice for dodging a good shot like Carrie. Leaning out from cover as little as possible, she buried a missile squarely into the center of the Helibres, sending it down in flames into the middle of the street in a shower of splintered parts. The others nonetheless kept coming, including one that split off and came straight at Carrie. The people who had been celebrating the wedding mere minutes ago started screaming and running for cover, but the helicopter gunmen turned their sights on them next, raining bullets upon the crowd, hitting men, women, and children indiscriminately. The gunners were using the death flower technique. Just start shooting, and death blooms all around you. She only had a few seconds to observe the carnage before diving out of the way of the spinning, mounted guns that ripped high-caliber rounds right through the walls of the bodega, turning the wall into shrapnel that tore into the backs of her and her 4 comrades. The chopper passed over and swung back to his cohorts rather than face the bazooka-wielding Carrie head-on. But the helicopters were just the first act. A second wave of Los Forasteros now came in driving jeeps. There were at least 7 dozen of them. She watched them cutting down the man on the street who had managed to escape the helicopter's guns. The sound was a nefarious percussion triad, the coarse roar of engines, the rat-tat-tat of AK-47s, the thud of falling corpses. Los Forasteros came to kill, but they stopped to collect their spoils. They invaded the wedding platform now. The 3 men from the first jeep never made it. Carrie heard a burst behind her and saw the hooligans fall down in a pile. The eager looks on their lecherous faces turned to ones of horror as they died. She turned to see her enraged comrade Jorge, M16, smoking. But their strategy had failed. Their only hope of coming out of this attack alive was to take that one helicopter, if they were lucky, along with a few men on foot, and hope this unseasoned scum would scare easy. But they were still coming. Carrie was unwilling to concede bravery on their part. Their lust and greed had simply overridden their fear. Their prizes were the women they punched, stomped, and bound, then carried back towards their jeeps. Some of the women had been shot in the leg or foot as they tried to escape. Los Forasteros didn't hesitate to take those immobilized victims. Being disabled wouldn't keep the women from serving their desired function. Children were the prize of second choice. Some of them managed to scratch, claw, and kick their way to temporary freedom. Their rewards were rifle butts in the back and slaps in the face. Now, a marauder leapt from his jeep and started going straight for the bride. Her new husband bravely stepped in front of her. A moment later, his teeth shattered as his lifeless body hit the platform. The cretin's eyes were manically wide as he seized the shrieking, traumatized bride by the wrist. A clear shot was obscured immediately by the commotion. Carrie now knew they weren't going to stop this horde, and that rushing the platform was suicide. But it was also the only way she was going to plant a bullet in that bastard's brain. She stepped out, telling the others to stay put. They foolishly but valiantly followed her to certain death instead. They sprinted for the platform, taking down 10 more Forasteros within 5 seconds. But Carrie intuitively felt that several of the AK-47s trained on her now were dead on. As the choppers turned toward them as well, the young bride broke away for a moment, Giving Carrie a finally clear shot at her assailant, she raised her M16 for one more shot before her death, just in time to see the raider flung 30 feet back and nearly as high with incredible force. He landed on the edge of the platform with a crunch. Carrie saw a muscular black man in black fatigues standing where the forastero had been with the marauder's gun in his hand. She turned to a noise on her right and saw the impossible. More young men and women in black were running at the forasteros, faster than the jeeps. Some of the militants held their ground and shot at the benevolent intruders. The newcomers weaved back and forth as they ran, dodging the bullets before they tackled the forasteros off their jeeps in great flying leaps. Other marauders suddenly went still, then slumped to the ground. Carrie couldn't figure out why until she saw the tranquilizer guns in the hands of the rescuers. A black woman in the black fatigues now emerged into view, this one wearing a jetpack. She launched herself into the air right at the nearest helicopter. A few of the other soldiers flew up behind her, all weaving to and fro. The woman headed for the chopper's top rotor. She hovered above it for a moment, and then she punched it clean off, sending it whirling behind an adobe hut with a crash. Carrie stood stunned at the superhuman feat. The chopper plummeted toward the rocky ground. Just before it hit, 2 other jet-packed soldiers punched through the glass on either side and snatched out the occupants none too gently. Smash! The crumpled chopper reverberated as its recent occupants, who had just dealt death so liberally, now dangled from the hands of the rescuers like wet kittens held by the scruff. The attack on the choppers continued, while down below the forasteros were knocked out cold and shot with darts that had them slumping out of their jeeps. Carrie and her comrades continued forward, guns down so the strangers wouldn't attack them. She needed to find out more about these strangers before they left, but saw now there was no need to rush. They were tying up the forasteros while also treating the wounded. They were using what looked like standard-issue medical kits, but their effects were anything but. The one who had rescued the bride now placed a gauze pad on the gaping shoulder wound of a 7-year-old, and it healed before her eyes. Carrie approached the man who seemed to be leading the group of rescuers. He spun around as Carrie approached and offered his hand. "I saw your brave charge." "Thank you for not saying reckless and foolhardy," Carrie replied, "and thank you for saving all of us. Now, who are you? How did you get here? How did you heal those wounds so quickly?" "I'm Greg," the young man said as they shook hands. "The other answers are going to have to wait. Can you help us treat the wounded?" Even as he spoke the words, he looked grimly on the sobbing bride holding the body of her dead groom, and the others behind her for which it was too late. "Of course," she replied, as Greg handed them advanced medical kits. Behind him, the other rescuers were accepting handshakes and hugs of gratitude and comfort before quickly going back to tending to the wounded. "Do you have a number where we can reach you?" Greg asked, even as he healed an older woman. "Yes, but I don't have something to write with." "I'll remember it." Carrie told him the number. Greg nodded. Then with a wave to the rest of the troops, he picked up 2 comatose forasteros and ran off effortlessly, his troops following behind in the same manner. Joel got back to the Reform Center at around 10 o'clock. His voicemail box was full, and he had over 100 new emails to answer. But he decided they could wait a few more minutes. He had missed the news on the flight to Las Vegas, so he opened up to NewYorkTimes.com. He wasn't disappointed. Long-awaited cancer treatment launched. The uncharacteristically bold headline began. Purported to entirely eradicate many forms of cancer. A smile broke across Joel's face. The second, smaller part of the headline stated, "Not effective on all forms of cancer." This was true. The treatment worked only on cancer cells that grew faster than normal ones. Reading down further, Joel read that the first lawsuit against No-Tech had already been filed by a man who got liver cancer after he started drinking again. He claimed he only started drinking again after hearing about the forthcoming cancer cure-all. Joel thought perhaps the man hadn't heard about some of alcohol's other deleterious effects, like killing brain cells. There was another article, farther back, about the other miraculous advances No-Tech had brought to the market over the past 3 years and how they had changed the world. According to the article, No-Tech had increased the average lifespan by 4 years and improved the quality of life immeasurably. The article noted that because of the increase in lifespan, the Social Security and Medicare crisis had been exacerbated. Joel, chuckled to himself lightly and shook his head. As with all the other breakthroughs, the elation at success was soon mixed with frustration, as some downside was inevitably found. He went back to work. The palace of General Diaz was a compound with a 12-foot-high iron gate that surrounded the perimeter. That, in turn, was surrounded by another 12-foot iron gate 20 feet away, forming a kill zone in between. Anti-aircraft batteries stood ready. The walls were made of foot-thick steel reinforced concrete. 1,000 troops and 20 jeeps with bazookas guarded the fortress. But to the group of 60 invaders, it was defenseless. They came from behind and above the palace on their jetpacks, roaring in at over 100 miles per hour. They moved in a zigzag pattern to avoid the hail of gunfire. They flew over the compound, then suddenly made a hellaciously fast and tight U-turn back like MiGs on an invisible luge track. Zip, zip, zip. The soldiers below could hear as they headed straight for the front of the main building. As the initiates moved closer, the Bolivian guards could see, strapped to the outsiders' backs, the foot-long, diamond-tipped steel cones. At the last instant they watched as the lead man reached back and snatched the cone from his back. He threw the spike in front of him, plunging it straight through the reinforced wall with a loud crack. The others were right behind him, ramming their cones through the wall as well. It sounded like the building was being hit with giant hailstones. The spikes had been Demetrius's idea. After the sensors they had dropped had shown the great thickness and reinforcements of the walls. The CVs intentionally cut a wide swath into the building and onto the same floor, so there would be few defenders standing off to the side, blasting away. The Bolivian soldiers hit the deck from wall to wall. They were hit with tranquilizer darts before they could move, making it look like the over 80 guards had suddenly dropped to take a nap in unison. The guards who came in from the other floors or hid behind pillars fared no better. They were hit as soon as they came in sight. General Diaz stood in his office, a strategically unassuming but fit man of 54, with Colonel Mesclan behind him. They listened to the ruckus happening below them. "It doesn't sound good down there," Diaz said. "Let's go." He looked out through the steel-grated windows at the back of his resplendent office and saw it would be pointless. The grounds were crawling with the invaders and littered with his men's bodies. The vigilantes guarded all exits. "My God, Javier, what are we dealing with here?" Diaz asked. "And I thought the world had forgotten us, but it looks like they're not using lethal force. Good choice. What do you think? I'm off to Saint-Tropez, if the bribes to the UN were worth anything." "Javier!" Diaz spun around. Mesclan was gone. "So there was an escape route. Tunnels, no doubt. No fair not telling me." Just then, a bang sounded as the door crashed off its hinges. "Get down! Get down!" The invaders yelled as they stormed in. Diaz calmly complied. The man in the lead was tall with dark hair. He was followed by 10 others, all of muscular build. They frisked him for guns. He had them, of course, and dragged him to his feet. His dread was already intertwined with a burning curiosity, and then his jaw dropped. Dr. Robert Harrington walked through the door, dressed in black fatigues. "General Diaz," the no-tech CEO said. "Dr. Harrington, so the rumors were true. You are behind these souped-up vigilantes in New York, and they are now here in my country as interloping invaders. I just can't believe you came yourself. All this for us? For another little civil scuffle down south that doesn't even make headlines anymore?" "It is unusual," the CEO admitted, "but I wanted to see for myself. The man who not only kills women and children but enslaves them too. The man who thought the world would ignore such a monumental abomination. The man who was almost right." "Ah, so that is the source of your vicarious indignation. I did enjoy these debates during my political science classes at Columbia. I'm afraid that now, however, I must take a more pragmatic approach." "You don't deal in practicalities," Dr. Harrington retorted. "You deal in atrocities." "Indeed, there have been atrocities. I have been doing what I can to stop them. But it is difficult to keep tabs on every rogue gang or colonel." "You're not releasing a statement, Mr. President. There's no need to lie. Everyone knows you're to blame for the death and subjugation of hundreds of thousands of people." "Oh no, Dr. Harrington. There have been millions killed and enslaved. First at the hands of you enlightened folk in the developed world. The Spanish came here and enslaved the whole nation. The ones of us they didn't kill, they let us dig up our own silver so they could have half the world's stock of that cursed shiny metal. We were nice enough to give them the engine that drove the world's dominant empire for decades. And our thanks was millions worked to death in Cerro Potosi. Did you know that some Bolivian parents there would kill their children during that time? Not out of madness, but out of mercy, lest their little ones should end up like themselves. Yes, I read about it. And this was well before your CIA came. You know they helped kill Che Guevara not too far from here. And now you've come for what? Is it the lithium this time? The general was referring to the huge lithium deposits the country held. Low estimates put it at $1 trillion worth. Other estimates put it at 20 times as much. Bolivia's goal had for some time been to become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, in a world increasingly powered by lithium batteries instead of oil. I think the general doth protest too much, Dr. Harrington replied. So, was lithium your little bit of extra motivation for this coup? Which countries helped fund it for a cut? Russia? China? Let's just say lithium extraction was one of many things where the old regime was faltering. And you've ensured the bloodshed continues. For the sake of ending it for good soon, you speak of kids being snatched up. If they were without my permission, it would be because, you see, children often make the best soldiers. They accept their orders without question, without hesitation, with abandon not yet tempered by maturity. And that makes it right? No, not at all. But it does mean that other factions will use them, as they have in the past. The same goes for the women who are taken. If some of the men under me allowed it without my knowledge, it would not be for vicarious pleasure. We are a poor country, Doctor, thanks to you in the developed world. Those women are a pivotal source of payment when money is lacking. And why is it lacking? Predatory loans from the World Bank and others? Is that your excuse? I'm not a fan of those loans either, and they will be discussed with the new government, but you and your fellow developing world dictators and kleptocrats have over $12.1 trillion squirreled away in offshore accounts, more than your collective debt. Why isn't your share of that money going to feed your people? To feed my people? Do you mean the half of my people who would like to see me dead? Who haven't submitted to my peace plan yet? Should I keep them nice and well-fed so they can better kill my men? Maybe they wouldn't want to kill you and yours if you didn't steal their aid, Dr. Harrington replied. General Diaz laughed. Doubtful, my friend. I'm sorry to say that whatever rival has had the upper hand in this struggle has been less than gracious. All of this cutthroat struggling to maintain your power, and the ironic thing is that, like most so-called leaders, you don't even care about power. At least not in the best sense. Not in the sense of being able to change things for the better. You only care about the trappings of power, the money, the prestige, and of course the women. Don't you, Dictator Diaz? General Diaz, he responded. You're neither. You're not a leader. You're a petulant brat, hoarding your baubles while bawling for more. Ah, right. And that's why you came. To save us from ourselves. Like the other invaders, you're just brimming with integrity and ingenuity. And you didn't just come here with ideals and morals, you came here with weapons, just like the others. We came to save the people from you, not themselves. We're here until a just system can be established, then we'll leave. Doctor, I didn't choose to be born into an often brutal land. But it is what I'm faced with. I'm doing the best I can to bring peace and prosperity to this country. Do you really think you could do any better? Dr. Harrington didn't respond. His enhanced gaze caught a truck about 2 miles away. General Diaz's men were dragging shackled women and children from the truck, who they slapped, kicked, and shoved into an austere concrete building. The CEO placed his hand around the dictator's wrist. Diaz looked down inquisitively. 500 volts pulsed through the general's body. It convulsed violently. Then he dropped dead, face down in his own vomit. Yes, I do, Dr. Harrington said to the corpse. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Stay tuned for the next installment of The Awakening of Joel Singer.